Hey everybody, welcome to the show. So today, guys, I'm joined by Pat Ahearne. So Pat was a professional baseball player. He's played in many leagues across the world. So he's played in the United States, he's played in China, Venezuela, and my home country, Australia, where he actually won Australia Pitcher of the Year and MVP for his club. So we're being joined by Pat to talk about tapping / emotional freedom techniques in sport. Welcome, Pat. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to be here.
No, I really appreciate your time. And it's really topical, Pat, because last week I had a chat to Steve Wells and we were talking about tapping in sports. And it's my understanding you've worked with Steve. And I guess a good place to start would you be able to tell us how you came across tapping and how that relates to your playing career?
Right. So, well, first of all, Steve's a great guy. I mean, I got nothing bad to say about him. He's just been wonderful, and he's good friend ever since we met on that day. So essentially, what happened was I was playing in Perth for the Perth Heat,
Yep.
and Steve's based out of Perth. And one day we were at training, and our coach just said, "Okay, you four pitchers go in the office." We're like, "Okay, what did we do?"
You're in trouble.
We'd go trotting off the field into the office, and here's Steve Wells sitting there at a table, and he says, "I have this new technique for, possibly helping out with performance, and the team has allowed me to meet with you guys, and we can sort of test it out and feel our way around with it." And really, it was kind of like, I think it was something that he recently had either been introduced to or come across in terms of knowing what EFT was. And so the way it began, and I was open-minded about it, and I didn't know what was going on or anything. I'm like, okay, we're in the office with this guy, and he wants to try and help us out. So all he did was he said, I want you to think about a batter that you have to face in this league who gives you trouble, who makes you you're really nervous. If things are on the line and he's coming to the plate, you're in big trouble. Can you guys think of that? And of course, all four pitchers at the time was like, "Yep, got it in mind. Easy. That's an easy one." So he started the process by just saying, "Okay, so what I want you to do is imagine that you're pitching, the game's on the line, and this guy is coming up to the plate and you have to face him. And visualize that in your head. And then when you feel any sort of emotional intensity about this, then we'll stop." So you start to imagine, okay, everybody's got to that point where they imagine this guy walking up to the plate. And then he says, "Okay, so I want you to take whatever word that you have or whatever level of emotion that you feel about this and give it a number rating. Like 1 is not very much and 10 is really intense, trouble, anxiety, what have you." So we all kind of just did that exercise in our heads and said, "Okay, well, right now I just feel like about an 8.
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Okay, so get to that point in your mental imagery. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to tap on all the points." So we went through a round or two, I guess, of just tapping on those points. And he said, "Okay, now run through the video in your head again. And then when you get to a point where there's some emotional intensity, stop and we'll rate it." And we did that whole thing over again. So what I found the first round was that the point where I felt some sort of anxiety or manifestation of emotion like that I didn't want in that situation, it was like up to a certain point. The first time I did it, it was like to the point where I see him walking up to the plate.
Yeah.
Then the next round, it was like, okay, now he's standing in the batter's box ready to hit. And then the number rating was, with each consecutive round of tapping, was getting lower and lower.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the span of probably about 15 to 20 minutes, I went from just thinking about this guy coming to the plate in the game, and I would have shorter breaths. My forearms would feel like they were tightening up on me.
Yeah.
And that's how it started. And then 15 or 20 minutes later, I actually felt relaxed, calm, and actually, I guess excited would be the word. Like, it went from my chest is breathing short, my forearms are tight, to hurry up and get up in the box, man. Let's go. It's on, you know, and you start to, and it was completely flip-flopped in terms of how it felt, which, you know, is an accomplishment in and of itself. But then I actually put it into practice, and the rest of the season, the guy didn't get a hit off of me, and made outs that were easy outs. It wasn't like, you know, he hit it really hard right at somebody. It was just like, yeah, I now all of a sudden, any sort of feeling that I had of anxiety of facing a certain batter was just gone. So in that little session, so, you know, we had, I don't know, like a dozen or so pitchers. So they were rotating us out by 3 or 4 guys at a time. So I went through that little 15, 20-minute session, and then I'm like, well, I'm not going back out on the field. I'm staying here for some more of this.
Yeah.
So the other 3 guys left. I stayed. A few more guys came back in. So the rest of practice, I was just sitting there in front of Steve doing this exercise with him over and over again. And it was just like, you know, shortly into that whole experience, I was just thinking to myself, this guy's not getting away without us setting up a time to work together one-on-one and continue this stuff. So, and I tell Steve the same story all the time. I said, if you'd have tried to walk out of the room without giving me a card or a contact so we could set up an appointment, I'd have tackled you and you wouldn't have gone anywhere. So, you know, so we ended up meeting, because the way that the schedule was for the ABL is that our games were mostly Fridays and Saturdays, and then we had the rest of the week for training. So I would visit him in between our weekend series that we would play games. So I would just go to his office, and it felt like a really, almost just like we were exploring the potential of this whole thing. You know, we would just try it on all these different kinds of things, and, you know, it got really interesting. So, and that, I'm sure you may have read it in the stories, but it was right around the midpoint of the season when Steve and I met. And the remarkable thing about it was the statistics of my first half of the season compared to the second half of the season. It was ridiculous. It was like, you know, this many walks, this many strikeouts, ERA of 3. And then in the second half, my ERA is under 1. And it was like a ton of strikeouts and a very few walks. So it was all these, you know, all the good stuff that a pitcher wants to have pretty much happened in the second half of the season. And I would place that squarely on the shoulders of Mr. Wells and working with him for the remainder of the year. And then I went back and I was playing, you know, professional. I think I started back in AA when I went back to the US, and I was calling him the same thing in between every start. Every 5th day, I would get on the phone with Steve, and we would just go through what happened in the game and work on some stuff using the techniques and whatever else came up too. So it was, you know, it was quite interesting how you end up finding out that whatever the trigger is, whatever the incident, if you will, there's this underlying current of emotion that kind of crosses over a few different things. And I noticed this because, you know, we were doing some work on this, and I remember saying to him that, you know, I get the same feeling physically when I give up a home run as when I got into an argument with my girlfriend at the time. You know, like there's the same, you know,
the same emotions underneath.
Yeah. And of course, with all these emotions, there's always a physical manifestation of it too. So you have a feeling, but you get, you know, like for me, it was like in my stomach, or, you know, breathing short in the upper chest, or the arms tightening up. You know, all those sort of physical things come about it too. So we'd actually, go through a tapping session on the emotion itself, but then also, you would say like, okay, even though I'm my forearms are tight right now, and then you'd go through some rounds of tapping just on tight forearms, and then it was just like, oh, okay, that worked, So for most of the time that Steve and I were working, I don't know how it was necessarily from his end, but for me it felt like, let's just try this out and see where it goes, and where it takes us, and what it works on, what we can what we can accomplish with it. So there was things like that where you're working on how it feels after a guy launches one 400 feet off you, and he's rounding the bases, and the whole stadium is cheering at your misfortune, and how that feels. And then you realize it's the same feeling as if you get into some sort of a little argument with somebody you care about. So it was that kind of a thing where not only did it reveal that, but in treating one thing, you end up treating both of them. So next time I gave up a home run, it felt different to me. And the next time I had any kind of, negative interaction in a interpersonal sense, there was a different feel to it, and definitely a different reaction to it. So it was really cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Pat. And I guess it sort of interests me when you mentioned when you first met Steve. So you basically went through this imagery practice. So you're imagining, a really good batter coming up, and just imagining that sort of triggered a bit of like a visceral stress response. And you noticed that. You said you felt your breathing constrict, you would tighten. But then after 15, 20 minutes of tapping, you were able to, I guess, like eliminate that stress response almost completely by the sounds of it.
Yeah, exactly. And it was good that he had us sort of, give it a rating or quantify it, so that we could say, well, in the first round it was a 9, and now it's like a 6. And it's like, okay, well, let's see if we can get it down to a 4, and then a 2, and now it's at a 0. And then what ends up happening is that you find that whatever your unaffected natural reaction to something comes out. So, without any, say for instance, without any thoughts of past trauma or past experience of failure or bad incidents, if you didn't have that, you would just be like, all right, here's a guy coming to the plate, let's go, let's get on the attack and have fun with it. So that ends up coming out, and that's what you naturally should have happen. But if you have these past experiences of, oh, that last time the guy hit a double off me, last time I was too scared to throw him a strike, so I just walked him. So you get that sort of thing that sticks with you, and then you go through these rounds of EFT, and it's as the name says, it gives you freedom from it, and then all of a sudden you just you act as you naturally would. So for me it was, I'm excited to go out and compete and have fun with this. And for some people, maybe they release all this stuff and they find out that they really want to be more aggressive. Like, I'm kind of laid back anyway, so I'd still compete, but go about it as more of a fun and enjoyable kind of activity. But if you have enough times where you failed, and it might stick with you, or whatever it is, it just if it's there and there's a quick and easy way to physically release that stuff, it's really huge.
Yeah, definitely. And I really resonate with what you say, because when we start playing sports, a lot of what draws people to sports is that fun and that enjoyment. And I guess with professional athletes especially, what you tend to see is like the pressure and maybe poor performances. They can almost add a layer of emotional baggage, which can get in the way of performing at your best. And it sounds like to me, when you use the tapping, you tapped on the points and brought these images to mind, it sort of unlocks something for you. Like, you were able to leave those in the past, and I guess just in your natural state, just approach it with a fresh set of eyes.
Yeah, that's somewhat how it goes too. I mean, and you can have a reaction as you described it, and there's a number of other ways too you kind of get to the same place. Like for instance, like I was saying before, your natural inclination without any extra baggage to hang on to comes out, and then you end up sometimes also, you get a feeling like those things happen to you, but when you think about them, they don't give you any kind of like emotional hook to it. It's almost like not like you're watching it happen to somebody else, but you're going, okay, I learned my lesson. I understand what happened. I get the benefit of it, even from, something that you didn't want to happen that happened. You're like, okay, well, even if it's something like, well, the world didn't end and the sun came up again, so it's not the end of the world. So, but you do definitely have this. It's not like it eliminates it from your consciousness. Like you have the memory, but it doesn't have the sting, if you will.
Yeah, so it sort of loses its emotional charge a little bit.
Right, and it doesn't it doesn't stick with you in the present either. So it's like, it happened, but you've processed it out, and so you can come up with any number of analogies. For instance, you could say something like if you had a bad meal and it's sitting in your stomach, and until you're able to process it out of your body, it's gonna make your stomach feel bad.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes these emotional instances are like swallowing something that's bad for you, but never passing it through. So it's like, yeah, I might have had a bad meal 6 years ago, but it's still not stuck in my stomach anymore. So I can just go and enjoy myself,
Yeah, definitely. And I think that ability in sports to focus on the next play, to, whatever's happened in the past, maybe you made a mistake. That's normal. We're all humans. We're going to make mistakes. But that ability to shift to that next play is so important, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah. It does. And again, it's not only from, like past, for a better word, past trauma. It's good for that, but then also there's an element of future things that you can deal with too. Like, you can imagine being at the next level that you're trying to get to. So if you're playing in the minor leagues and you want to pitch in the major leagues, but you can imagine yourself being there and facing this superstar big league hitter, and it gives you that same sort of rush or emotional hook or imagery or whatever. And so you can put yourself into future instances and have it where now, instead of thinking of pitching in front of 50,000 people screaming at you to fail and feeling like you're about to fail and you're just all locked up from it, you're just like, oh, this is great, let's go, I'm ready. So you end up getting back to that natural state that you should be in, or you want to be in, definitely.
Yeah, so it sounds like there are a few different uses for it then. Obviously, you can use it on the past, be it past traumas or maybe plays that you're sort of hooked on, plays that you're having trouble getting past. But then as well, so you've used it on future scenarios, maybe people you'll come up against that might be a bit anxiety inducing, or just circumstances that maybe got the emotions going, and it helped you really center yourself and feel prepared for the moment.
Sure. It's quite useful to go through anything that you can, recall. And usually the first thing that comes into your head is what you go ahead and start with. So it's like, if you started with somebody, you say, okay, well, what is, the toughest hitter you face? Oh, okay. Yeah, I got that in my head right away. That's easy.
Yeah.
Because he's the toughest hitter you face for a reason. So you're saying, okay, well, it's because either I don't make good pitches to him, or he hits the ball hard off me every time, or it's not a good matchup, or what have you. So then you can take those sort of emotional hooks, and then you can release those things, and now you're not you're not, you remember it happening, but it doesn't cause you to have any physical feeling of whatever emotion that it elicits. So you can do it that way and treat stuff that has already happened to you. You can treat stuff that is, possible in the future. You can say, well, I got a big game coming up, and you can think, well, what if it goes bad? What if I bomb? What if I don't have a good day? And you can treat that sort of thing. You could even take it, and this is pretty effective too, is that you can treat success in the sense that you say, what if everything goes exactly how it should? You're like, uh-oh, no, So, and it's really interesting, and I love it how Steve Wells has a program that he runs, which is not exactly, I don't think it's necessarily for sport. It might be on, a corporate level or a personal level, but the name of his program is called 100% Yes.
Yeah.
And it's really cool because we've often done things where he would say, all right, say a certain sentence about what you want to do. So for me, it was like, I'm going to go back, because I actually had pitched in the big leagues, got sent down, and then I'm in Perth, which is, the most isolated city in the planet, and I'm the farthest away from being in the major leagues again. I'm sitting in a room with Steve Wells, and he says, say in a sentence what you want to do. I said, I'm going to go back and pitch in the big leagues. And then he would say, well, how true does that statement feel? And so if some of these things, you could say a positive statement, and your being, if you will, your spirit or your thought of it just says, no, you're not going to do that. No.
How true did it feel when you said that?
It was pretty good, because I think we might have been a few sessions in, so I was starting to feel pretty excited about things. So, but there was definitely some work to be done there, and we did stuff on that, and so but that's the whole point, though. There's that sort of pressing forward to not only just dealing with stuff that you didn't like and trying to alleviate the emotional feels from things that happened bad in the past, but you can look towards the thing that you are dreaming of doing, and there may be parts of you that are saying, no, that ain't going to happen. It's just
that
not,
inner resistance.
for whatever reason. Yeah. So there's a part of you, even for things that you are striving for, or think you're striving for. And if you say, okay, I'm going to do this, and then a part of you is going to say, no, you're not. And so when you go and treat that stuff, then all of a sudden you get to 100% yes. And then you just, off you go. And it's not, it's where pressure is not there anymore. So
it's so interesting you saying that, because when we do think about what we want to do, it can be scary, it can be intimidating, and there is that part of your mind that's just yapping. It's just telling you all the reasons you can't do it, why it's not possible. So it sounds like you've used tapping on that to sort of get you from baseline to really like peak performance. I guess one question I had there is, did the voice in your head go away, or did it get a bit quieter, or does it just not bother you anymore?
No, it's similar to the original exercise with the hitter, where you're visualizing, and then the first time you do it, it's a 9. The next time you do it, it's a 6, and then it's almost like that sort of inner resistance. At the first time, it's like, hell no, and then the next time it's like, I don't think so, and then the third round it's like, well, maybe, and then the next time around it's like, I think you're right. I think you are. Yeah. And then later on, you're like, hell yeah, we're all going there. We're all doing that. So so you end up actually sort of, I guess in a sense, whatever inner voice resistance you have, you end up recruiting them to use the voice for your benefit, to be on your side,
Yeah. Yeah,
which
that's
is nice.
fantastic. And I think that's the thing, like the human mind, we're so blessed because it is so powerful. But the thing is, when the mind turns against us, it can really make it difficult to perform. But with this technique, you're almost able to rally the mind and get that voice on your side.
Sure, sure. And I mean, if it may also like it may just sort of go away too. So you never know how it will how it will turn out, but it always goes in the direction you want it to, which to me was pretty amazing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's amazing when I was looking at it is your stats for the Australian season before EFT and after EFT. So I've actually got those on my computer. So I'm just going to share my screen briefly, Pat, just so the people
Sure.
watching can actually see it as well. Not having much luck with it, unfortunately. My computer's not letting me. Anyways, I will upload a link to that, but I definitely think people watching should have a look because it is night and day difference, and it's yeah very incredible to see. So,
Yeah, I didn't even get a good look at those until after the season. So I was like, whoa, that's I was impressed myself with the difference. And it was almost to the day that I met Steve that we started working, and all of a sudden it just, because that was the thing initially for me. Um, I don't know, that it wasn't like it was a shocker because I wasn't going in with any sort of expectations one way or the other. But for me to be able to sit in a room and go from anxiety, tight breathing, tight muscles in the forearm, not wanting to deal with the situation that I'm visualizing, to actually going and being excited about it in the span of about 15 minutes,
yeah.
and then having it carry through to where it's not like, oh, just in this room and it was some kind of magic trick. It was like it just worked. It was like, wow, okay. The same thing that I was feeling in that room after 20 minutes of tapping, the next time I faced the hitter, felt the same way. I was like, get in there, man. It's on. Let's go. And then it was like jam shot, 8 hopper right back to me, easy throw to first, inning over. That was, the results happening from a guy that used to be the most terrifying hitter I'd faced in the whole league. So,
Mhm. And it's so interesting. Like there aren't many techniques in sports psychology that are that powerful, that can work that quickly, but also the effects endure past the session, and they really generalize to the performance context.
mhm. Yeah, and I don't have any sort of qualifications to say as to why or how this whole thing works, but it's very much, I think that normally when you're trying to deal with the mental side of sport, there's there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of like, well, try to just think about something positive or say good things to yourself, and then you get in the heat of the battle and all that goes out the window.
Mhm.
But I think with this, it's because there's an actual physicality involved, even though it's just tapping on some acupressure points or something to that effect. There's a thing you can do physically in it, and I know, it works for the general population, but I know definitely it will resonate with athletes because athletes are so used to being in tune with how their body feels and moves. And so if you're able to say, we're taking something that you can physically do to help you mentally, I'm all in, and it works great. So
And
it
that's
was
the
very
thing.
cool.
Athletes are so in touch with their bodies, so it seems like a very natural method, natural modality to use. That's why I'm thrilled I can have you to chat with Steve to share his wisdom because in sport it's not very widely used. So I guess in the spirit of that, I'm wondering what role do you think tapping has played in your career? How did that sort of change the trajectory or just the way you play the game?
Well, it allowed me on a mental level. It allowed me to stop worrying about stuff that I would normally be worrying about, and so your mental energy is freed up quite a bit. So if I can come up with sort of an analogy for that, it's like you achieve this sort of equilibrium, but picture that you feel balanced and you feel like you're in some sort of equilibrium because you have a heavy suitcase in both hands.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm balanced because I got, 50-pound suitcases in each hand. Or you use a little EFT and you have balance and equilibrium because you just put down these suitcases. And so that's a kind of a good way, I think, of describing this, because I see a lot of guys that I've played with or coached, and they, that I think is the basis of, especially for baseball players, they're superstitious as hell. So they have little rituals that they got to go through, and I was the same way over some parts of my career, where it's like I have to have a certain meal, I have to get dressed a certain way, this has to happen, that, and so all of a sudden you have all of these things that are arbitrary, that you say, okay, if A, B, C, and D happen, if my socks are the right way, if I have a certain haircut, and then everything will come together, but you're still like fingers crossed hoping.
Yeah.
Whereas, and so that's you just holding these two big suitcases, hoping that you're balance yourself out.
Yeah, you're hoping they're the same weight.
Yeah, but you end up spending half of your mental energy just carrying these suitcases around, versus saying, okay, instead of being superstitious or thinking this or thinking the worst or having all these things, you just put these down. So the energy that you were using to carry two 50-pound suitcases, you're not carrying them anymore. So now you have that extra energy to put towards your actual task. So in terms of career-wise, it really gives you some extra energy, because you're not as preoccupied with and spending your energy mentally or physically on stuff to try and balance out this idea that you're going into a sports performance where you're competing, you're going up against somebody else, you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know if you're going to succeed or fail. So all of that unknown is one suitcase, and all of your superstition is the other one. But if you say, well, I don't need to worry about whether or not things are going to work out, I'm cool with it either way. Oh, I could put this superstitious stuff down too and just go play.
Yeah.
So you and play with a lot more joy and a lot more energy. So that definitely was a helpful thing in the career. And then we even went a little bit deeper too, in terms of, again, talking about the physicality of it. I would do tapping sessions after games for, like soreness, lactic acid buildup. You tap on this idea that you have, you're going to have sore muscles tomorrow, and then all of a sudden the next day you're like, I feel pretty good today.
Do you think it made a difference, tapping on the physical element of performance?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll give you another story too. I just remembered there was a game that I was pitching. This was while Steve and I were working together, and I had a start in a day game, and it was a really hot day, and I felt tired just showing up to the ballpark, like just physically tired, like I didn't sleep well or something like that. And I went out in the first inning, and I was just like, oh my God, I feel like I'm dragging and all this stuff. And I went down in the tunnel there, and I'm sitting in the tunnel, and I got my towel, and for some reason I thought, I'm going to take this fatigue that I'm feeling, I'm going to do tapping on it, but I'm going to indulge it. Mm-hmm. So I was in the tunnel in between innings, trying trying to feel as tired as I could possibly feel while I'm just tapping on these points.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, oh, oh. And then all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, it's gone. And now I'm just like I just got this, burst of energy, and it carried me through the rest of the game, and I felt great. And I was like, wow, there's some, emotional, physical component to this whole thing, to the point where I actually was able to, like I was wearing this jacket of fatigue, and I just took it off, and I'm like, oh, okay, now I'm energized again. Let's go. And then I just went out and finished the game, and felt great. So it was like, wow, that was, so I would do that. And I don't know, I'm trying to think of the other exercises that I would do that were really helpful. Something like that. I felt fatigue and I just got rid of it. There was oftentimes what I would do too, because a lot of the places that I would play, I had, played there before. So I was familiar with the environment and the stadium and everything else. And so if I had a game where I was a starting pitcher that day, before I went to the ballpark, I would actually do the, watch a mental imagery video of yourself doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just, see myself getting in the car, driving to the stadium, going inside the clubhouse, getting dressed. And it was interesting because random bits of no would come up. Like I'd be sitting there like imagining myself putting my socks on, and I'm like, oh, I'm starting to feel a little nervous. No. And then you just tap on it, like, oh, okay, just put your socks on and keep going. And then I would just, go through the whole imagery of leaving for the field, getting dressed, getting stretched, doing my warm-ups, going into the game starting, the team that I was facing. And whenever I felt any sort of reaction to any of it, I just stay in that moment where I felt this, adverse reaction while I'm tapping through it. And then you would just feel it go like this. And then it just sort of melt away on you. So then, I just called it rehearsal. Okay, I got to do my rehearsal first. And I would just see everything that was happening. I would see plays, like pitches that I would want to make, how the hitter would react to it, how they would put the ball in play, what my fielders would do, what the umpires would do, like every little aspect of the thing that you could imagine. I would just run it through that video and just see what happened. And if something elicited a reaction from me, I would stay in that particular moment while I was tapping through all the points until it just didn't anymore. And then just go on to the next thing and the next thing. And then it was like, okay, time to go to the ballpark. Oh, this is fun. I'm driving, I'm putting my socks on. Here's the guy, here's the players I was doing, here's the pitch that I wanted to make. So it very much sort of locked you in, tuned you in to where you wanted to go and how you wanted to feel. And there was no, whether it was an actual voice in your head or just a feeling that you would have, if you had any of those that would say no to you, they just weren't there anymore. So everything was yes.
It's really interesting, and I guess there are a couple of elements there. So obviously imagery was really big for you, just imagining these circumstances, and that triggered sort of the emotional response, which you could then use the tapping to deactivate. I'm just curious, what did you say? Did you say something to yourself while doing the tapping? Were there statements that you said while tapping to that image, or was it just more getting the image to mind and then going through the points?
Well, when we first started out, when Steve and I first started out, there was the EFT setup phrase, like, even though I feel this, I fully and completely accept myself type thing. So we would say that. We would do the, like the rubbing on the chest point, say that setup phrase 3 times, and then whatever we named that, like, even though I have this, tight forearm feeling, and then each time I would tap on the point, you would just say the words tight forearm feeling.
Yeah.
And so we did that initially. And then after a while, it got to the point where you just would say, okay, what is it that what is your feeling, and what's the name of it? And then you could just name it without going through the whole setup phrase. You could say, okay, I'm feeling like angry. Okay, angry feeling. Haha, angry, angry. And then
Yeah. Just really
that tended to
simplified it.
go. Yeah, and then also you could even, and this is what I would do in those little rehearsal things that I would do. I wouldn't even give a name to any of it. I'd just be sitting there visualizing it, and I would feel something. So I wouldn't say, "Oh, it's my this feeling or that feeling." I'm just like, "Oh, there's something." Okay, and I would just sort of try and connect with it while I was doing the tapping. It's similar to how I was like, okay, I feel really tired, but if I resist the idea that I'm tired,
It gets
it's
worse.
just gonna make me more wore out.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, instead of fighting against it, I'm gonna say, all right, let's see how tired I can really get. Let's do that. And then I did the tapping on that. So I didn't even sit there and say tired feeling or whatever. I was just like going, oh, and just sort of physically feeling what I was feeling, and
Yeah.
then doing the tapping on it, and it released that side of it. So if we go back to our analogy, it's like the tired feeling is one suitcase in one arm, and the angry or resisting the idea that you're tired is in the other arm, and now you're all of a sudden you're even more tired because you got two suitcases in your hand.
Yeah.
But if I say, okay, well, let's open this tired suitcase and really see what's in it, and let's see if we got some tired goodies in here that we could play with or whatever. And then you open it up and you find out it's like, oh, there was nothing in there in the first place. Let's go. We're not tired anymore. So it was, the whole process went from using the setup phrase, which is actually quite effective too, to just naming whatever the feeling is and using those words while you're doing the tapping, to just, trying to experience the feeling as you feel it right in that moment while you're doing the tapping, and not even saying any words or naming anything to it. So all of those things are equally as effective. Just depends on, how much you want to talk to yourself on any given day, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's great to see there are a lot of different ways to use it, and even just the power of sort of allowing yourself to feel the feeling. I mean, when you had that tiredness, that might trigger some thoughts that, oh, I shouldn't feel this tired, or how am I going to perform if I'm this tired? Like, I'm not going to have a good game. So it's, yeah, that baggage that gets added on to that physical feeling, which just is as it is. And the tapping was really able to help you melt away that baggage, and the physical feeling sort of naturally went away or dissolved.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there's the feeling itself. There's and all those things you described are basically just the resistance to feeling that way. And then I think I want to say, I don't know if Steve thought of this on his own or he read it somewhere. It was like he said, it was something along the lines of, you have to go to your ugliest, most grotesque looking child and give him a kiss. And
Yeah.
so then, because it's basically, I think a lot of it is that whatever emotions you're feeling is just, it's trying to get your attention.
Mm.
And if you don't pay attention to it, or you try and push it away, it's going to get louder and demand more of your attention. But if you say, okay, what you trying to tell me here? And most of the time the emotion will go, I would, nothing. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I'm really tired. No, I'm not that tired. Let's go play ball. It's like that kind of thing. So, so it's definitely useful in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess sort of to wrap up the interview, what advice would you give young athletes or people interested in performance? Would you recommend tapping for them?
Oh, of course, of course. It's I can only, speak anecdotally from personal experience to where maybe the type of athlete that I was, or the person that I am or whatever, is more amenable to this, because part of it is just that you know, you have to have a feel for what your emotions are. You have to have a feel for, I think it's big to understand the physical manifestations of emotion, and it's different for everybody, you know. So you just have to ask yourself, okay, so when this bad thing happened to you, what did it feel like in your body? And so some people might, like for me, it was like my forearms felt tighter, my breathing felt like it was up here. For other people, it might be like, oh, I felt sick to my stomach, or the back of my neck was hurting, or whatever it may be for each person. And then you say, okay, well, let's go and take that ugly, grotesque child and give him a kiss and see what he has to say. And so, you know, if like your neck gets sore when you get stressed out, you can say, okay, well, that's the physical part of what your emotions are trying to tell you. So then you end up saying, okay, well, let's take this baggage that I'm carrying in the back of my neck and set it down, and actually talk to what's causing that to happen. And more often than not, you'll just find that if you give it that sort of voice, if you will, it says what it has to say and then just melts off and goes somewhere else, and you don't have it anymore.
Yeah, it just moves along.
Yeah, exactly. It gets processed. It goes back to our idea of, if you ate something bad, well, then, you know, you just go and flush and then you're good, you know, or however you want to put it, you know.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
definitely.
not too you know, not too gross about things, but yeah, if you just process the stuff out, because you know, I've heard it described where, you know, if something emotionally negative happens to you, that sometimes it can get stuck. If it's stuck within your being and doesn't get processed out, then each time something similar happens that'll trigger it, it's just going to flare up on you again. And so that's why, too, I think conventionally, sometimes when you go and talk to somebody about it, like a therapist sort of situation, and you talk about it, you know, you can have a conversation, and then you start intellectually understanding what's going on, but then it's all very nice in the moment, and then when you go back out in the world and you experience it again, it still hasn't been processed out, and it just
still has
flares
that
up.
visceral body component.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing that can also just sort of hide out in the bushes, because, you know, maybe you're in a good mood, maybe something's like everything's cool, but somebody drives in front of you in traffic, and now all of a sudden you're screaming and honking at them and wanting to kill the person. You're like, where the heck did that come from?
Yeah.
And then if you go, you know, you go off to the side and you say, okay, every time somebody cuts me off, I want to murder. And then all of a sudden you go, oh, okay, that's because I'm angry at something that happened to me 10 years ago that I forgot about, but it had something to do with being in a car, whatever it is, you know what I mean? You get that sort of thing that's like, rather than saying, you know, when you go and try and talk things out without doing any of this physical movements of the tapping part, it may just be like, oh yeah, I know when that happens, I get really angry. Well, I don't feel angry now. Of course not, because that incident's not happening, and you're not actually trying to elicit it in the moment, like we did with the visualization exercise. So
yeah.
So I think oftentimes that there's that sort of, you know, you have to indulge whatever it is that you want to treat. And so part of the effectiveness is to have enough feel for yourself to understand that, okay, this is a physical manifestation of some emotion. And the other part of it too is just to be sensitive enough, and maybe even at times courageous enough, to actually face something like that.
Yeah.
You know, so you end up and you end up again with the benefit of treating the emotion, but there may be 10 or 20 or 100 different triggers to that emotion. like I was telling you before, the time that I give up a home run felt like it was a similar feeling to getting into a fight with your significant other. So then you treat the feeling of giving up the home run, and all of a sudden, if there's some sort of an argument happening, you don't feel the same way, and it doesn't affect you the same way, and consequently you act differently, and you get a different result. So, it's treating that undercurrent of emotion, and it takes care of any number of triggers that might cause that to come out. So that's another thing that's really cool about it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, and it's so good to hear that not only did it help you perform better in your sport, but it just helped you in life, helped you sort of live your best life and just function as effectively as you could.
Sure, and it's all about that idea of processing out things that are stuck with you.
Yeah.
So, and as well, you can imagine if I'm spending, half of an Australian baseball season once a week palling around with Steve Wells and just kind of seeing where this EFT thing takes us, all kinds of different things come up. I think at the time when we were in the office, I said to him, I said, listen, we're going to meet again. We're meeting again because there's 3 things that I want to do.
Yeah.
I want to go back and pitch in the big leagues. I want to go out to the golf course and consistently shoot in the 70s. And I want to go into the club and chat up the hottest girl there, no problem. And Steve just looked at me and said, "Oh, is that all?" I was like,
classic Steve.
Yeah. Yeah. So I worked a little on my golf game as well, and I remember a golfer too that Steve was working with, who's PGA superstar right now, as I can remember. So it was like, getting in with the athletes was a good thing, a good use of this, because every time you go out there to perform, you're faced with all of your baggage, if you will.
Yeah, and it's awesome to have a practical technique that can help with this, because there are so many unique challenges to being an athlete, and I think the importance of the mental game is really starting to be appreciated.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, shoot, look at what's going on, everything with the Olympics too. It's like the Olympics and Naomi Osaka pulling out of the French Open and all this sort of thing. And there's that, and I mean, shoot, I pitched in the major leagues briefly, so I understand, but I've definitely not faced the level of pressure that somebody like Simone Biles or Naomi Osaka goes through, or all these other, major athletes who are on the world stage. So, these are the kind of things that it's ideal for using these kind of techniques with.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, thanks for joining us today, Pat. It was really interesting to hear from you just about your lived experience as an athlete using these techniques. I mean, last week we heard from Steve about the research behind it and his experience as a sports psych, but it's always interesting to hear about the actual experience of an athlete using it. So really, thanks for your time and thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. I'm happy to help. Because shoot, if this, turn somebody on to it and it helps out in their career, then that's outstanding. That's great. So I'm glad to be on and chat with you about it, and I appreciate the work you're doing too.
Awesome. Thank you, Pat. Take care.